Well, the latest Newspoll has sent a bit of a shiver through Canberra. That is a trend on now, it would seem. Declining support for Labor, costs of living being the central issue. About half of those surveyed in this Newspoll say they are, or they believe they are in a worse financial position under the Albanese government compared to 2 years ago. Australians want the Prime Minister, apparently, according to these numbers, to get tough or do something about the soaring cost of living. Joining me now, as he does every week, is Redbridge Group Director Simon Welsh. Simon, reference Newspoll because it does seem to show there is a bit of a trend now. Are you picking up this same trend?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, we are. It's the trend is the trend, and the trend is definitely a softening of the Labor vote, particularly in those outer suburban areas, really hard hit by the cost of living crisis. And what we're seeing when we talk to folk out there is this absence of presence from government on these issues, on the issues particularly of cost of living and so forth. They're just not seeing action happen on the things that are really mattering to them right now. And so what tends to happen is, the leaders then become very important. They're the vehicle, sort of the vehicle for the party, the vehicle for the values, those sorts of things. And what they're saying, particularly about the Prime Minister, is when you leave a vacuum in politics, the voters will fill it for you. And the way they do that is they tends to sort of break on two dimensions. Do they care? Do they give a damn about people like me? Do I have a sense that they're on my side? And competency. Do they have the wherewithal to do the things that I want and need them to do? The good news for the Prime Minister is that even still in those outer suburban areas, he kind of ticks the warm box, he ticks the care box, he ticks the empathy box. People feel like, he does care, he's sort of on their side. The problem is that they're not ticking the competency box, and it's this lack of action that they're seeing. So people are becoming quite disenchanted, quite frustrated. It's now becoming sort of an entrenched characteristic of the Prime Minister that maybe he doesn't have what's required to lead us through this really complex economic environment. People recognise it's complex economic environment. So, sort of in the same way, leading into 2022 election, we talked about how that sort of lack of empathy, the other side of the equation on Morrison had become entrenched as a characteristic of his. This competency thing is really at risk now of becoming an entrenched characteristic of Anthony Albanese and this government. They've got a very short runway now to turn these things around. I think, so it's a real pivot point right at the moment. Another interest rate rise and there's big trouble.
Yeah, so it goes down to competence, do you think? Is that the central theme coming through the focus groups about the ability for the government to want to and need to do something about the rising cost of living?
Yeah, it's that capacity to affect change. So when we say competency, I don't mean sort of competency in a very functional sense. It's a competency in, does this government has what it takes to make the changes that are needed? So it's quite a sort of an expansive view of competency, if you will. And certainly that's the issue. That's the question mark in people's minds.
So when you conduct these focus groups, where is that coming from? Is this coming from, Labor Green seats? Is this coming from the outer suburbs, the regions? Where's the overwhelming view geographically, if you like?
There's a bit of it everywhere, but it's definitely strongest in those outer suburbs. Like they just haven't seen or heard from the government on the issues that matter to them. And some of that I think is, it's things that aren't of the government's making. There's been conflict and these sorts of things intervene, but some of it has been of their making. And I think first-term governments sort of sometimes have to learn these lessons that talking about an issue, so housing crisis, let's take that, because that's one of these big issues in the outer suburbs as well. There was a flurry of activity around the housing fund. That's sort of dissipated. It hasn't been talked about since. It takes sort of 6 months, just pick an arbitrary figure, but it takes a long time of consistent, repeated messaging to get the message through to a significant number of voters, because people have got lives to be getting on with. There's plenty of other things to worry about. So I think some of it is about messaging, it's about communication. But some of it's also about policy. People are saying, where's the response? Where's the reform? Where's the changes around economics and housing and those sorts of things that are going to make a material difference in my life? We're just not seeing it.
I find it really interesting when you look at where these numbers are going. Obviously, the Greens are pretty high in the polls. They're seeing some increase. There's a little trend there. But, I mean, is it too premature to talk about the Albanese government being a one-term government? And is this sliding support for Labor at all going, directly to the Liberal Nationals, or is it spread elsewhere?
Yeah, this is where it gets complicated because the Liberals certainly do have their challenges, and there's been a lot talked about sort of the Liberals pivot to the outer suburbs, and certainly. So what we're seeing out there is on the competency box that there's sort of a tentative tick for Peter Dutton out there. He's seen as tough. He's seen this could be the guy that we need at a time like this. The hesitation is you're walking into traditional Labor territory out there. So there's a big question mark still on, well, does this guy actually care about me? The other side. So it's sort of the inverse problem of what Albanese's got in that part of the world. That's challenging. That's challenging. So what that sort of says to us, again, we're a long way out from the election, but when you've got we've got on the one hand, one guy who seems kind of likeable, but maybe he's not up to it, maybe. And the other side, you've got a guy that might be tough that we need, but gee, I'm not sure whether, he's on my side and whether I like him. What that says to us is minor parties and independents will probably have a pretty good day. But there's a lot of variables in that. Where do parties like the Greens contest? Where can independents actually get the resources and the wherewithal to run decent campaigns into some of these electorates? It's going to be messy.
Certainly
I think that's about the only conclusion.
Messy seems to be the word of this term, and actually politics over the last decade, but let's not go back too far. One final question here as we go into Christmas. I mean, Christmas is going to be crucial in terms of a reset. If what you're saying is correct and the polls are correct, the government needs to come back in February next year, all guns blazing.
Absolutely. There is a very limited runway now. I mean, there's talk of a pre-Christmas interest rate rise. I mean, that, again, every time there's one of those interest rate rises, just knocks another few percent off the government. If they don't come out swinging, I mean, I would argue you'd want to start swinging this side of Christmas. Don't wait. But if they don't come out the other side of Christmas swinging pretty hard on the economy, on cost of living, on job security, that's starting to worry people now as this economic crisis sort of bites, on housing, then I think, if by mid next year we're still having this conversation, I think it's all over.
Well, we'll note that down. And the date is 28th of November, and Simon Welsh said that at 9:41. We'll follow that up. We'll see you soon.
Good on you. Thanks, Laura.